When Allied bombers flew deep into Nazi Germany, they faced a gauntlet of Luftwaffe fighters that turned the skies into a shooting gallery. American losses were catastrophic until one aircraft changed everything. The P-51 Mustang didn't just protect bombers, it hunted German fighters over their own airfields. Luftwaffe pilots called encounters with Mustangs a death sentence. This is the story of how an airplane designed in just 117 days became Germany's worst nightmare and turned the tide of the air war over Europe. By 1943, the Allied bombing campaign over Germany was bleeding to death. 8th Air Force B-17 and B-24s flew unescorted deep into enemy territory, and the Luftwaffe massacred them. On October 14, 1943, during the second Schweinfurt raid, 60 bombers were shot down in a single day. Crews called it Black Thursday. The loss rate was unsustainable. Without long-range fighter escorts, the daylight bombing strategy was doomed. Existing American fighters couldn't solve the problem. The P-47 Thunderbolt was tough but lacked range. The P-38 Lightning could fly far but struggled at high altitude over Europe. The British Spitfire was superb but had even shorter legs than the P-47. Bomber crews knew that once their escorts turned back at the German border, they were on their own. The Luftwaffe knew it too. They simply waited for the escorts to leave before attacking. Then came the Mustang. Initially dismissed by the US Army Air Forces, this fighter had been designed for Britain in 1940. Early versions were fast at low altitude, but disappointing at higher elevations where bombers operated. The aircraft seemed destined for ground attack roles, nothing more. But engineers saw potential in the airframe. It just needed the right engine. When American Mustangs finally appeared over Germany in late 1943, everything changed. They could fly to Berlin and back. They could outfight the Luftwaffe's best. Suddenly, German fighters had nowhere to hide. But how did an overlooked fighter become this dominant? The answer lies in a desperate British request and a California company's 117-day miracle. In April 1940, Britain was fighting for survival. The Royal Air Force desperately needed fighters, but British factories couldn't produce them fast enough. The British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation in California with an urgent request: build Curtiss P-40 fighters under license to supplement Spitfire production. North American's President James "Dutch" Kindleberger made a bold counteroffer. His company could design a completely new, superior fighter in the same time frame. The British were skeptical but desperate enough to gamble. They gave North American Aviation just 120 days to deliver a prototype. Chief designer Edgar Schmude and his team worked around the clock. They studied every fighter design available, incorporating the best features while innovating ruthlessly. The wing design used a new laminar flow airfoil that reduced drag dramatically. The radiator was positioned behind the pilot, creating additional thrust through the Meredith effect, turning cooling drag into forward push. On October 26, 1940, just 117 days after the contract signing, the prototype NA-73X rolled out. It first flew on October 26, 1940. British test pilots were impressed by its speed and handling. The RAF named it Mustang and ordered it into production. Early Mustangs arrived in Britain by 1941, entering service with Army Cooperation Command for reconnaissance and ground attack. But there was a critical flaw. The Allison Phi 1710 engine performed beautifully at low altitude but lost power dramatically above 15,000 feet. At the altitudes where bombers and their interceptors fought, 25,000 to 30,000 feet, the Mustang was mediocre. The US Army Air Forces tested the aircraft and wasn't interested. The Mustang seemed destined to remain a low-altitude reconnaissance plane. Then a British test pilot had an idea that would transform aviation history and Germany's fate in the skies. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew a Mustang at the Royal Aircraft Establishment and immediately recognized its potential. The airframe was exceptional, better than the Spitfires in some ways. Harker reported that if North American's design could be married to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the result would be extraordinary. The Merlin, which powered Spitfires and Hurricanes, maintained power at high altitude through its two-stage supercharger. Rolls-Royce quickly began testing. In October 1942, a Merlin-powered Mustang flew for the first time in Britain. The results exceeded even optimistic predictions. Top speed jumped from 390 miles per hour to 441 miles per hour. More importantly, the Mustang now performed brilliantly at 30,000 feet. Meanwhile, North American aviation had independently reached the same conclusion and began installing the American-built Packard Merlin V1650 in U.S. production aircraft. The P-51B model emerged in 1943 with the Packard Merlin engine. Everything changed. The aircraft could cruise at 362 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, while consuming fuel efficiently enough to fly over 2,000 miles with external drop tanks. No other fighter combined this range with high-altitude performance. The teardrop bubble canopy introduced on the P-51D model in 1944 gave pilots exceptional visibility, a crucial advantage in combat. By December 1943, P-51Bs began escorting bombers over Germany. Their arrival coincided with a new doctrine. Fighter pilots were now encouraged to pursue enemy aircraft aggressively rather than staying rigidly with the bombers. Mustangs began flying ahead of bomber formations, sweeping German fighters from the sky before they could attack. The Luftwaffe's advantage was evaporating, but having the right aircraft was only half the battle. The Mustang's true impact came from how it was used, and that strategy terrified Germany. Before the Mustang, Allied bombers were slaughtered beyond the range of friendly fighters. The Luftwaffe developed sophisticated tactics. They'd wait until P-47s and Spitfires reached their maximum range and turned back, then attack the vulnerable bombers in waves. German controllers coordinated hundreds of fighters, directing them to hit bomber formations from multiple angles simultaneously. Without escort, B-17 gunners fought alone against FW-190s and BF-109s, attacking at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. The P-51 shattered this system. With two 75-gallon drop tanks, Mustangs could escort bombers to any target in Germany and still have fuel for combat. On March 4, 1944, P-51s escorted bombers to Berlin for the first time, a 1,100-mile round trip. The psychological impact on both sides was immense. American bomber crews finally had protection throughout their missions. German pilots now faced skilled fighters over their own bases. The 8th Air Force implemented aggressive tactics. Lieutenant General James Doolittle, who took command in January 1944, ordered fighters to stop flying defensive circles around bombers. Instead, Mustang groups ranged ahead, hunting German fighters before they could form up. They pursued fleeing enemies to their airfields and strafed aircraft on the ground during landing and takeoff when planes were most vulnerable. Luftwaffe bases became death traps. Numbers tell the story. In the first quarter of 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,684 fighters and 1,016 pilots. Many were killed during takeoff and landing when Mustangs caught them at low altitude and speed. German fighters had to scatter across numerous auxiliary airfields, disrupting coordination and maintenance. The systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe fighter force accelerated. By D-Day, the Allies had air superiority. This dominance wasn't just about range. Mustang pilots proved they could outfight Germany's best in any circumstances. The P-51 wasn't just a long-range escort, it was a superior dogfighter. At 437 miles per hour maximum speed, it was faster than the Bf-109G and matched the FW-190's speed while outmaneuvering both at higher altitudes. The Mustang's laminar flow wing gave it excellent high-speed handling. Pilots praised its light, responsive controls and superb visibility from the bubble canopy. In turning fights above 20,000 feet, the P-51 could outturn German fighters whose performance degraded at altitude. German pilots developed grudging respect mixed with fear. Luftwaffe ace Heinz Knoke wrote that engaging Mustangs was sheer suicide without numerical superiority. The P-51 held energy better in vertical maneuvers, allowing American pilots to use boom and zoom tactics effectively. It could dive away from trouble faster than opponents could follow, or climb to maintain the altitude advantage. The 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered devastating firepower, more reliable than cannon at high altitude, where cold temperatures caused weapon failures. American pilots who transitioned from P-47s or P-38s loved the Mustang. It was less forgiving than the rugged P-47 but rewarded skilled pilots with superior performance. Many of the war's top aces flew P-51s. Major George Preddy shot down 26.83 enemy aircraft, mostly in Mustangs. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer scored 24 victories. These pilots and hundreds of others exploited the P-51's advantages ruthlessly, turning the air war decisively against Germany. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe fighters avoided combat when possible. Inexperienced German pilots flew obsolete aircraft with inadequate training and dwindling fuel reserves. Experienced veterans were killed faster than they could be replaced. The Mustang's combination of range, speed, altitude performance, and maneuverability made it the dominant fighter of the European theater. The impact of this air superiority extended far beyond individual dogfights. It reshaped the entire war. The P-51 Mustang's influence on World War II cannot be overstated. It enabled the strategic bombing campaign that crippled Germany's war production. Factories producing ball bearings, synthetic oil, and aircraft were systematically destroyed because bombers could now reach targets deep in Germany with acceptable losses. By late 1944, German industry was in collapse. Fuel shortages grounded Luftwaffe fighters even when aircraft were available. The Third Reich's ability to wage war was bleeding out. Allied air supremacy made the D-Day invasion possible. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe flew just 319 sorties against thousands of Allied aircraft. German ground forces fought without air cover while Allied aircraft attacked at will. Mustangs roamed over France, destroying transportation networks and making German reinforcement nearly impossible. The breakout from Normandy succeeded partly because German forces couldn't move during daylight without being destroyed from the air. The P-51 proved that strategic bombing could work, but only with proper escort. Pre-war theorists had believed bombers could defend themselves. The Schweinfurt raids proved that theory wrong. The Mustang validated a different approach, long-range fighters enabling deep penetration bombing. This lesson influenced post-war air power doctrine for decades. The aircraft also demonstrated that smart engineering could overcome initial limitations. The Merlin engine swap transformed a flawed design into a war-winning weapon. Over 15,000 Mustangs were produced. They served with distinction in nearly every theater, from escorting B-29s over Japan to ground attack in the Pacific. After the war, P-51s equipped numerous air forces worldwide and fought in Korea. But their greatest achievement was over Europe in 1944, where they broke the Luftwaffe's back and made Allied victory inevitable. The P-51 Mustang transformed from an overlooked fighter into the weapon that won air superiority over Europe. Its combination of range, performance, and firepower gave the Allies an insurmountable advantage. The Luftwaffe never recovered from facing Mustangs over their own territory. One aircraft, born from a 117-day design sprint, changed the course of history. Keep exploring the stories of the machines and people who shaped our world. Check out more fascinating military history on Heritage Plains.